So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Simone Yap, and I am the 55th National Chair of the National Black Law Students Association. And I'm super excited for this amazing intellectual property panel with our amazing sponsor, Latham and Watkins. And as I was, trying to preface, but I had a brain freeze, I am going to be heading into intellectual property litigation. And so to be able to have nominal conversations with BIPOC IP attorneys means so much to me. So our first amazing panelist is Paranjeet Singh Sammy. He's a partner at Latham and Watkins. We have Tiffany Weston, who is an associate at Latham and Watkins. And our other panelist is Camila Alexander. I think she's having a little bit of tech issues right now, but she will be able to join shortly. So let's hop right into it. So for my panelists, where are you from? What were you involved with in law school? And what kind of firm and practice area were you looking for when you started?
Happy to take it. Tiffany, do you want me to go or I'll start?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the panel, having Latham be able to sponsor it. I think it's wonderful, right? And I'm really pleased and honored to be a part of it. So thank you. And so where do I come from and what's my story? And I'll try to be brief about it, right? So my name is Tony Sammy, but as Simone mentioned, my name is Paramjeet, right? I'm actually from India, right? And my parents came in 1969. I'm the only lawyer in the family. I have two older sisters. Everyone else was born in India. So I'm also a Sikh, right? So I don't know if you guys know any Sikhs. We wear a bracelet and we wear turbans and we keep long hair. And in case you can't tell from looking at me, I lost like my hair, right? But I did wear a turban for 23 years, right? Growing up and this is in the US in sort of rural Maryland. So all through elementary, middle, high school, college, got to law school. And I think this is, important to mention. I got to law school and my background was electrical engineering and physics, right? So I was sort of an outsider already in law school back then. Now there's a lot more folks who have technical degrees that go to law school, but I felt like even more of an outsider because I was like, I'm not a poli-sci major. I'm not, I've never taken an essay exam. What am I doing here? These guys are going to run circles around me because there's people with, thirds in their last name and juniors and, all kinds of stuff, right? So then I was applying for jobs and for my 2L, 1L, 2L summer. And what I did was I did something that big decision in my life, right? I cut my hair, right? My hair was down to my waist and I cut my hair. I talked through the decision with my family, my dad who still wears a turban, and it was a huge deal, right? Huge deal. I thought that the only way I could get hired is if I sort of went in a more conventional way, right? And I'm just being totally honest with you guys, right? It was the hardest decision of my life. So I cut my hair, and I still had hair back then. So I imagine me with like short hair, but with hair. And on my resumes, my full name and official name, and it's still today, is Paramjeet Sammy. So Paramjeet is a Sikh name, Sammy is a Sikh name. And so I changed it to a nickname that people would call me ever since I was young. It was Tony. People would call me Tony. So I changed it to P. Anthony Sammy, right? Nobody called me Anthony, but I changed it to Anthony, right? Just, it sounded white, right? It sounded whiter. It sounded more easy to pronounce. And forgive me if you guys think that I am just like a sellout or somebody who didn't have guts, right? This was a long time ago. This is 25 years ago. And that's what I did. And so I got a job, got into IP and all that stuff. And now I'm trying to figure out ways to sort of come back and recapture some of that. But I'll talk more about it later. But I'm an IP lawyer. I'm a partner at Latham. I am a global vice chair of the department. And I litigate intellectual property cases and some patent cases, yes, but very much of my real interest is these trade secret technology cases. So they could be breach of contract, they could be trade secrets, they could be copyrighted source code, but it's when humans go from one place to another and they steal stuff, that gets my juices flowing, and that's what I do. So sorry for the long intro. I'll stop there.
Thanks for that, Tony. I am Tiffany. As someone mentioned earlier, I am a third-year associate at Latham and Watkins. I'm out of the DC office. So I've actually lived in the DC area now for almost 20 years. I also, like Tony, am from parts of Maryland. So I lived in Maryland for a really long time, went to college there, high school, college there. I actually started working at the patent office before I went to law school. I was an evening student at Georgetown. And so that's kind of how I got into IP. Is basically my experience as a patent examiner, kind of applied on a whim. Didn't know what I was doing, had no clue what IP was, but I applied anyway, and I liked it, and I decided to go to law school, and here I am at Latham. I don't know if Camila has joined.
I have joined. I'm
Okay.
here. You do not have my picture. My phone decided to update seconds before the meeting started. And you can't stop it, right? And once your iPhone begins to update, there's nothing you can do. So eventually, before this is over, you will have a picture of me, but not right now. So were you done, Tiffany? Because
Yes,
then I can.
yeah.
Okay. So I'm Camila Alexander. I am originally from Flint, Michigan. I haven't been there in a long time, but that's where I was born and raised. And I subsequently went to college in Boston and have lived up and down the East Coast in most major cities, including Boston and New York and DC. It turns out I'm a city girl, even though I'm from Flint, Michigan. And so I did, as an undergrad, I was at MIT. So, I eventually chose science and ended up going to Harvard to get my PhD in biology. So I'm a scientist. So my arrival in IP is not surprising. My road to being a patent litigator, which is what I am now, was long and circuitous, and I'm happy to talk about it a little more later. But I am currently a 7th year patent litigation associate here at Latham and Watkins. And while I do dabble in some of the other types of law, and I think we all do, which is one of the things that makes it really exciting. So I have worked on some trademark litigation. Because of my background, I still do some deal work, or technology, transaction work. We work on arbitrations. We work on matters in front of this other, for lack of a better word, way to litigate, which is the International Trade Commission. So we all do all different types of work and are involved in all those types of work.
Thank you all so much. In our chat, was going off during some of the comments. So just appreciating Paranjeet, your candor. Shout out to Michigan for Camila. I clapped for DC for Tiffany. I'm a Howard Bison. So DC was very special to me, and it's still very special to me for 4 years. And I'm currently in Boston for law school. So just going all over the map. So I definitely relate. And I think hearing about all of your different locations, all your different backgrounds and your different stories shows me that this panel is going to be even better outside of the topic of IP, but just being able to show that personal connectivity to your legal journey and showing how you've grown, where you started, lessons you learned. So speaking of lessons, let's get into it. So focusing more so on the work matters, for example, can you talk about the matters that you work on and what made you choose intellectual property litigation as a specialty and how it differentiates from different fields?
Sure. Happy to take a crack. If Tiffany or Camila, do you want to go, or shall I jump in?
You can start, but I'll definitely say a couple of words.
Yeah.
Sure. I'll the stuff I work on, right? So as Camila mentioned, right, there's lots of different types of IP, and we all dabble in a lot of different broad spectrum, right? So when folks think of IP, the most likely thing that comes into everyone's mind is patents, right? And that's really a large part of it, right? But there's trademark, trade secret, copyright, all different types of aspects of IP. And so just some examples. So I've got 2 trials coming up. I've got a trial in Atlanta, Georgia, and this is a trade secret trial, and it has to deal with aluminum spar cords for airplanes, right? So inside the wings of an airplane are these aluminum members that are 128 feet long. So it's really complicated to make these things, right? Because they have to stay in the air. And so it's on a microscopic level when you extrude the aluminum and how you heat treat it, how you stretch it, how you form it. There can't be any sort of cracks or weaknesses. Otherwise, they will literally, like the planes will, start dropping out of the sky. So the case is basically employees from one company, Alcoa, went to another company, Universal Alloy, and Universal Alloy started to compete and make these big pieces, right? So the allegation is you guys stole our trade secrets, sort of how we make these things. And there's some documents that went over, there's some emails, there's lots of human behavior in it. So it's the closest thing, these trade secret cases in my view, to civil theft. It's a civil version of theft, right? So there's a human story behind it. And when we try these cases in front of juries, it is always first about who did what, and secondly, understanding the technology. That doesn't mean the technology is not important. It's vitally important to understand whether the technology qualifies as a trade secret, how it's used, and how it works. But it's, to me, what gets me excited is those human stories behind it. So that's an example of a type of case. Another example is a copyright source code case, where computer source code is the underpinnings of a laser, right, that's used for eye surgery. And we represent a client who brought over some employees from another place, and those employees worked at another place that had a laser, a similar laser, and we created our own, our client created its own laser. And some of the source code they're saying is too similar and protected as a trade secret, as well as copyrighted source code by employees over there. So a similar type of case, but those are the types of litigations that I work on and I enjoy very much. And there's all types of IP work. I'll stop there.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in here. So I'm still really new in my practice, so I don't have a niche yet. I do mainly patent stuff. So I think Tony kind of talked about, copyright and like source code and sort of trade secrets. I almost do exclusively patent work right now. Every case that has come before me has been, our client has gotten sued or we have sued based on some sort of infringement of intellectual property rights, which by definition was just patents. As far as the technology is concerned, I actually straddle both. My background is bioengineering. However, that actually ends up being both tech, which is more of like anything from like a circuit or like really hardcore circuit, like even just like a piece of a semiconductor circuit, but also it could be sort of networking. I did sort of like video streaming type stuff for a really long time. Right now I'm working on one that has like instant search technology, which is really interesting, but I've also done things on the other side, like medical devices. So I kind of straddle both. I'm comfortable in sort of like both worlds, just by way of background. But I do mainly patent stuff. I do a lot of district court and then like PTAB proceedings. So I haven't actually chosen a niche yet within there, but that's mainly what I work on.
And just for everyone on the call, so PTAB is the Patent Trial and Appeal Board. So
Yes.
it's an administrative court under the USPTO. But that like decisions made at that court, you can appeal to the Federal Circuit. And if you litigate, it was mentioned earlier, the ITC, which is the International Trade Commission, and they have their like administrative levels or hierarchical levels, but then you can again appeal to the Federal Circuit and then from Fed Circuit to Supreme Court. And now I'm gonna pass it off to Camilla.
Yeah, so I'm gonna, so I think you've heard the variety of things that we sort of work on as litigators. I think I'm gonna speak to, well, what made me choose the type of intellectual property litigation specialty, because I have done it all. I started out as a patent agent, working at a patent prosecution law firm, which means we write the patents and then we send them to Tiffany, where Tiffany used to work, right? We go back and forth with the patent examiners and we say we should get in a patent and they say we shouldn't, and that goes on for some time. So I did that for 4 years and then decided it wasn't for me. I worked in a licensing office doing technology transactions. So that's where like professors at universities have ideas and then the university is trying to get it to, because the university can't afford to pay for all the patent prosecution that I used to work in, and they can't afford to take it to market generally, right? They're starting to do that more now, but So they need to partner with a company or a business. And so they try to license that technology to a company like Pfizer or something like that. So I worked in the technology transactions office. I worked at a biotech startup where I was in-house patent management, again, still mostly working on the patent side, but also beginning to dabble in transactional work, contracts and deals. And then I decided I was going to go to law school, right? Then I thought law school is worth doing because I want to be a transactional attorney. I want to do deals. That's where I'm going to be. I was so certain. I didn't even take evidence when I was in law school, which is like a basic course. I'm like, I don't need this. Like, I'm gonna be working in deals. I'm gonna be doing contracts. Like, who cares about evidence? And so, of course, today I am a patent litigator and I do almost no transactional work, but I did, when I went to my first law firm, probably about half of my practice was M&A work, mergers and acquisitions work, deal diligence, that sort of thing. And then half of my practice was patent litigation. And I found what fit my lifestyle, because transactional work can be very unpredictable and is in fact very unpredictable, right? When is the data room going to open? When is the deal going to happen? When is this going to drop? And then all of a sudden you have to drop everything to work on that particular matter. And there was a lot more certainty with patent litigation. But in addition, I just liked it a lot better. It turned out I didn't like redlining contracts wasn't for me, like drafting contracts wasn't for me. What I loved about contracts ended up being like litigating them, like what happens when things go wrong. And then we look at the contract and see what's in there, that sort of thing. That was what I really enjoyed. So, that's sort of how I decided where within sort of the three large buckets of IP litigation work I was going to fall. And then I didn't do soft IP. I didn't tend towards soft IP because I'm a scientist.
So hearing all of your different lived experiences in your personal life, but also through your legal career, being that the field of intellectual property, as we know, is a very white sector. And a lot of the clients that we're dealing with are also white as well. We have BIPOC inventors, but the representation that's being provided for them or to encourage the promotion or the protection of their IP is very limited. So with that said, reflecting on your lived experiences personally and throughout your legal career, how do you think that you can impact the intellectual property sector in order to diversify the inventors that are receiving patents, having their trade secrets protected, receiving copyright and trademark protection?
You gotta do it, right? Everyone on this call, if you're interested in IP, just get out there and be those lawyers that are go-to lawyers that represent everyone, right? And you'll see that when I'll back up for a second, right? Early on in my career, I represented, Motorola, and I went out to Alabama, right? And I went to their location in Alabama, and I went to have lunch. Right? I had my meetings with the higher ups, right? And then I went to have lunch in the cafeteria. And what did I see in the cafeteria? Just a sea of Chinese and Indian people, right? In the cafeteria, and then I was sitting with the management, and they were all white. Right. So they were all white. And it was like, this is crazy, right? I mean, the technology, when you mentioned, Simone, like the inventors, this country, right? And I'm not going to get on a soapbox. My dad came here in the late 60s when John F. Kennedy said, we're going to go to the moon. And everyone was like, holy shit, we don't have enough people who are smart enough to go to the moon. So let's go and give visas to anyone who's got any technical degrees. And there was that whole window of people like, if you have a science degree, you come over. That's how my folks came over. So I'm a huge fan of this, right? But it gets very difficult because technology is one thing, and there's problems like I mentioned in technology. I think those problems are changing, but changing way too slowly, right? And I come at this, to be clear, from a brown guy's perspective. I do not, claim to know everyone's, view on this. Just I'll give you my own, right? I think, it's a problem, right? That's in the tech sector. Then you get to the law, right, which protects the tech sector or represents it. That's even worse, right? And I'm not trying to dissuade you guys from doing anything. I'm saying get in here and help us change this thing, because in 24 years of practicing, I can tell you how many times when you pass the there's the pews in the courtroom, right? And there's a little swinging door. The minute you pass that swinging door at counsel table, right? I can't tell you how many times I was the only non-white person, only non-white lawyer at trial, like at the trial, except like an Asian guy running like the overhead projector, right? I mean, I'm being facetious about it, but it is really difficult. And so I guess the point of what I'm trying to do is to try to give you a sense of, from my perspective, how things should change and how they're changing slowly, but more encouraging you to do exactly what Simone said, is get out there and make your mark by just being out there in the legal profession, doing what you're doing. And hopefully it's going to be an IP, but whatever it is, other people will see you and they'll be like, yes, this is more normalized. This is more, I can, it's just the way it should be. Sorry for going on the soapbox.
Camila, Tiffany?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think part of it is just being here, right? I think Camila was actually on the recruiting committee, but I think all of us have participated in sort of interviewing candidates that come in. And a lot of times it's nice when they see somebody who isn't white who is interviewing them. But that also means that we have some influence on what does it look like for the next generation of attorneys that are coming to practice at our firm, and who are we reaching out to? And I think that that's really helpful. I will say, from like the sort of inventor standpoint, because I worked at the patent office, they have done a lot of like public outreach and trying to get people to just understand the basics of intellectual property. Like, what is it? How do you go about getting a patent, applying for a trademark, going to the copyright office, all of that stuff. They've been doing a lot of public outreach over the last few years, just because I think there's a little bit of a gap in the knowledge of how do you do these steps, right? It's mainly been a lot of universities or people with money who've had access to these systems. And so the patent office themselves are trying to figure out, how do we make this accessible for those inventors who might not know that they need to go and patent their invention, or they should be applying for a trademark at the very least for their website or their designs or whatever it might be. I don't know where the outreach is right now with like COVID and things like that, but I'm sure it's going to pick back up. They do these like little road shows and go across the United States and things like that to try to close that knowledge gap. And they do at a much, like, I say, younger level than as lawyers we might do it, right? Because they go when it's sort of people in college and even younger. They have sort of K-12 programs and things like that, so that people are getting this knowledge, not just once you have a BS or a BA, whatever, they're trying to do it before you even get to that point, because the knowledge should be more widespread.
Camila?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenging problem. For some reason, it has been exceedingly challenging in the legal profession. It's sort of funny because someone's like, it's not rocket science. Like, we're not sending someone to the moon. We have managed in other professional settings to get more people of color into the profession and retain them. We can sort of, having been on recruiting committee, the small pool of people, we can get them in the door, but then we can't keep them. And so then if we can keep them, can we get them promoted? So, right, there are lots of layers, there are lots of issues. And, I'm going to be honest, I've worked, it seems like, in a lot of industries, and I think lawyers are the least willing to change and innovate. And they sort of want to do what they've done before and what's been successful before. And I mean, not in the practice of law, but sort of in the institutions of law. And so I think that's been a challenge. And I've been on the diversity leadership committee here at Latham & Watkins for about 3 years. And I will say that our firm people have a lot of great ideas. They're very willing to try new things, to have an impact. But we've kind of gotten the low-hanging fruit, and now it's time for the hard work. of changing hearts and minds and processes, prior processes. And so that's what we're hitting up against. And, as both Tony and Tiffany have said, like even talking to this number of people about being an IP, like you don't have to be a scientist, you just have to be interested in, in the subject matter, and you don't have to be fascinated by it now. What's interesting is you just don't, going to law school, you don't know, right? It's not the practice of law. Like you're learning basically law history and cases, and being a lawyer it's an apprenticeship, and so you don't know till you try it. And like I'm evidence of that. I thought I wanted to do things, and it was absolutely not for me. And so we really need to get people in here and just try it. And I think we can get them hooked if they're willing to try.
I love that. Yeah, go ahead.
So that's Camila. She's absolutely right, and Tiffany, you're absolutely right. And I just look at this chat, and someone asked a quite good question, right? When you say IP, do you choose a niche, right? And you have to choose one: patents, copyrights, trademarks. You should aim for sort of varied practice. Absolutely, what Camila said. You don't know what you like until you know what you don't like. So that was the best piece of advice that somebody ever gave me. And I said, yeah, well, why are there tax lawyers in the world, right? So, I mean, somebody wake up one day and be like, I want to be a tax lawyer. I always thought it was like the mortuary business. Like my dad's a tax lawyer, so okay, so I take over the family business. But I tell you, you don't need to pick and nor should you, because you don't know. And maybe you're smarter than I am. You're definitely smarter than I am. But I didn't know, right? And I felt pressure, like I guess I have a hard science degree. I guess I should be a patent lawyer, and I need to pick. But you really don't. And you should be open to all different types of law. And the best, I think, skill is, and I think technical degrees hone this skill, but it is by no means exclusive to technical degrees. And that is analytical skills, problem solving skills are number one, right? So it's information triage. What I learned in engineering school like 25 years ago, I mean, it's worthless right now, right? It's not like, oh, Tony remembers what he learned in like that junior year of class. No. You got to learn it all again, but you just don't have the phobia of learning interesting things, right? So I don't know anything about aircraft aluminum, but I'm not afraid of rolling up my sleeves and trying to learn it and talking to the experts and all that stuff. So, I mean, Camila and Tiffany will tell you, like Tiffany, she probably reviewed all kinds of applications of crazy different technology that you got to wrap your arms around and get to know. And same with Camila, of course.
No, I think this is like phenomenal, especially contextualizing it, right? And just go back to Camila's point, just about the institution. I think that we can have like an entire symposium on the elitism, gatekeeping, institutional practices of just trying to keep BIPOC law students, one, out of law schools. That's why NABALSA exists, in order to debunk that and fight against that. And then secondly, to the second portion of the number of BIPOC attorneys, and specifically for Black attorneys, again, pulling it back to NABALSA's mission and why we are here, why we do what we do, and just being able to really not only open the door, but blow it up and get as many people in as possible in order to really diversify these fields. And looking at the chat, like we have so many different interests. So I think, and especially with people wondering about workarounds and how to get into IP. So can you all speak to what courses or experiences you would recommend for law students and maybe even pre-law students that are interested in going into IP or fields similar, what they should recommend to take?
I would recommend, if anybody has not taken like a basic course on intellectual property, to take one. So you kind of understand patents, trademarks, what a trade secret is, copyright, things like that. I know that was offered at my school. I don't know if it's offered everywhere, but just a basic course that kind of runs down just the overall, like, what are these systems? What are the differences between them? Where do you go to get some of these things? Because I think that's like a good intro to what is IP. And I think if you're interested in patents, definitely taking one that's specifically for patents, but The law can be very difficult in the patent sort of area, and it takes us years to sort of grasp all of the different like sort of details, and just like it can take years to get really into patent law. So I would suggest that. And as far as just like general litigation skills, like evidence is a good one. I took an advocacy course that was really good. Those are the ones that come to mind right away.
I'm going to build on that and say, I was going to start with exactly what Tiffany just ended with, which is the advocacy course, right? So I went to school in '95, right? Way before most people were born on this screen, I guess. But like, I don't know. I went to Cornell, right? And I got there, and the dean like pulled me over, and he was like, "Hey, you should start a salsa." And I was like, "What's that?" And he's like, "That's a South Asian Bar Association." I was like, "It's what do you want? Me and Rupa Joshi to like sit in a corner and eat samosas?" Like, it was nobody there. There was nobody, right? And we didn't have a balsa, right? Because there were no Black law students that year in my 1L class in '95. So this change is happening now, which is great. But back to the question, what's a great courses to take and how you want to get into it, right? IP, if there's courses that they offer, take it, right? I still can't believe that you can graduate law school. I'm not sure if you can anymore, but you could graduate, at least when I went, you could graduate law school without ever taking an advocacy course where you had to stand up and in front of more than like one person and give a cogent, lucid, and persuasive argument, right? And we call ourselves lawyers, right? And people are like, well, we got corporate folks and that's only for litigators. I say no, right? I say communication is the #1 skill, right? Everyone has the smarts. If you're here and you're taking LSATs and you're going to law school, it's not like baseline intelligence. It is the ability to take information, can convert it into something that you can communicate and you can advocate and you can persuade. And that, when you see people with that skill, right? It doesn't matter whether they got a poli-sci degree or an engineering degree, because I'll tell you, some of the best lawyers I've ever gone toe-to-toe with in a courtroom, some of them were ex-asbestos lawyers, ex-tobacco lawyers from Texas. I mean, these people don't know a patent from a hole in the wall before they start litigating, but they're damn good lawyers, right? And if you're smart enough, you can learn the substance of the cases that you're working on and the structure of the law. Admittedly, it's difficult on patents. It is, and it's a niche, and there's other hurdles you got to jump through. But for yourself, right, communication, like in your interview, to be able to communicate to your client, to be able to communicate to opposing counsel at a mediation, to a judge, to a jury, huge.
And I just want to jump in with, you should absolutely take that basic course to figure out, just to get a survey of it. Like I found out, I took like a trademark course and I'm like, this is amazing. Like, who knew spam, like all the arguments about like, it was really interesting. It was really interesting. But I would say I didn't take that many IP courses because, I'd been a patent lawyer for 4 years. I'm like, I'm not taking these courses. Like, I don't, it's all theory anyway. And I went to NYU, which is, I thought I was liberal. And NYU was like deep left field. The IP professors were like, I'm not sure I believe in patents. And I'm like, what are you talking about? But I will say my favorite course was like IP for Indigenous cultures, because it was really interesting, because we look at sort of the standard IP process and how it's not accessible to Indigenous cultures, and how we have gone, not we ourselves, but society has gone to these cultures and stolen from them, right? Their IP, their drugs, a variety of things. And so, I just want to give a plug for those types of classes also, because it makes you gets you outside of sort of our typical IP mindset. And I think it makes you think more critically about IP as it exists and as we practice it now.
I love that you had the opportunity to have an IP in Indigenous culture class. That is phenomenal. I've never even heard of that until now, which shows you that not that much education or promotion is being done on that topic, and that lack thereof is actually aiding the promotion of the theft from these cultures, from these tribes, from this entire population. So just showing that information gap and how prevalent it is and how we have to lessen it, really close it, and just ensure that we are being the social engineers that we must be, but also advancing social justice through IP and protection of all. And I want to go back to something that Paramjeet was saying, and just thinking about, communication, right? And I hope that with everyone on this call, and with all of our phenomenal attorneys and myself included, that with our communication, we are persuading you to come into IP because we need you. And you see how diverse it is. You can be a litigator, patent prosecutor. If you want to do transaction side, you can, negotiations. Like, there are so many opportunities in this space, and it's everything we do is innovative. Like, how do you become a better advocate? I think you're showing you the different ways that you can just excel in your oral, written, but also personal advocacy. So that's my little 2 cents. But moving on to the next question and thinking about some of the comments we've gotten in the chat. So what tips do you all have for students that are interested in IP without the hard science background? And the second part to that is, do you have any specific advice for 3Ls that are interested in IP that will be graduating shortly but haven't had exposure to the field of IP? I'm gonna go with Tiffany because you're our patent prosecutor.
Yeah, so I think it's going to depend a little bit on, when you say IP, like what part of IP you want to do. For patent prosecution, it is likely required to have some sort of hard science background. So if you want to sit for the patent bar, which is specifically for practicing before the USPTO, they actually require you to have hard science or engineering degrees. And part of that is every single examiner has a hard science or engineering degree, right? So people that you're talking to on a daily basis, back and forth with the patent office, they are going to be in the weeds in the technology, and they want to make sure that you also can speak that language. Because if I'm speaking about something really specific, some sort of signal processing technique, and you're like, I don't know what, it's going over your head, there's going to be a little bit of a gap there trying to get it out the door and actually get it to a patent. And as far as litigation is concerned, we don't necessarily require a hard science or engineering degree. I know there's quite a few litigators, at least at Latham, that don't have it. I won't speak on behalf of recruiting, so I don't know exactly what the requirements are right now, but I know that there are people that do not have a hard science degree or engineering degree that practice specifically on the patent side. Copyright does not require copyrights or trademarks, trade secrets, none of that requires any sort of like hard science degree or any sort of engineering degree. None of that does. Patents is usually where it gets a little sticky, just because the technology can get really, really detailed. And maybe that means that you might not be the person that does like invalidity stuff, right? Or work on that, but maybe you work on all of the other things. Like, there's still a bunch of things that are just general litigation that you need the skills for, right? Discovery, for example. Somebody's got to write those responses to the discovery, right? And it has nothing to do with necessarily your hard science. Almost any litigator is going to have to deal with discovery. So don't feel like you actually need it for those things. But I think whoever the person was that was asking specifically for IP, I think there's just a question of like, what kind you want to go into. And I'll pause there and see if Camila or Tony want to jump in.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it also sort of depends on how the firm that you go to is set up. So, I started out at Jones Day, where they still did patent prosecution, which we do not do at Latham. And so the way litigation worked there, many of the litigators did have a hard science or engineering background, but many did not. And we could function that way because we had a whole patent prosecution group. And so they would work hand in hand with the litigators, and they would be deep into the patents, and they would look at, you know, the claims and the diligence and, you know, all that other sort of thing. We're set up a little different at Latham. We don't do patent prosecution, so a lot of the litigators have the science or engineering knowledge, because we're the ones that have to do that, right? We have to look at the patents, we have to figure out the technology. And so we tend to have that background, but it's not, you know, it's not 100% necessary. As Tony said, you just have to be willing to roll up your sleeves and learn the technology. There has been several times, just because I'm a scientist doesn't mean I understand this aspect of science, or, you know, I also have a bit of a mechanical background, and so you know, I can work on devices, but it's been a bajillion years, right, since I've actually looked at any mechanical engineering. And so you have to, you know, you have to be intellectually curious, which you need to be for law anyway, but especially here. You know, it's fascinating to learn this new stuff, and if you come to it with sort of that attitude, I think you'll be okay. And in terms of preparation, I'm not really sure there's a lot you can do to prepare. Just go to whatever law firm that you go to over the summer. Express an interest in it. People will be happy to give you work. You know, people have been extraordinarily busy over the past few years, so people will be happy to give you work in it. And then, you know, you'll get an opportunity to see if that's what you're interested in, if those are the people you like to work with. That's even more critical, right? That I forgot to add that piece, like deciding what area you want to work in and what's the best for you. A large piece of that is the people that you work with, and to some extent it's more important than the actual technical subject matter or the aspect of IP. You know, you've got to work with people who are good to you, who are looking out for you, who are going to pull you up, who will give you good work, who will give you opportunities, who will let you have a life. Like those, we spend so much time doing this work. Working with people that are awful for you, right? You need to find people who are the fit for you. Working with people that it just doesn't work for you is going to make it untenable. You will burn out and you will leave. So that's really even the more critical piece. Then it doesn't seem like it, but once you start practicing the law, you will realize that it is absolutely critical, more so than the subject matter.
Parent G, did you have any thoughts on the matter?
Yeah, not much. I mean, this is wonderful advice, and I agree with it all. I think the just to pick up on the end what Camila was saying, when you go anywhere, right, you have to express your desire to do IP, right, to the people you're working with, and you have to be willing to try all different types of assignments and be your own advocate. So that's really, really important. When I was coming up, as a junior associate, you know, and I was like, why? I would just do it by mimicry, right? Because I was like the only like non-white guy there, and like those guys would always, like, my compatriots would like be going to lunch and stuff like that, because they were just out there and they had this like entitlement or whatever view they had about the world was, you know, was just, they walked with more, you know, they're like, yeah, obviously I belong here, and it was very different for me, right? And that's a huge part of it. And it's a huge part of everything. Forget IP, right? When you come into the law, right? Because, you know, Trip Dorky the third or whoever it is going to be like, you know, the guy who's got the crested blazer and like he wants to, you know, he belongs there, right? But you have to advocate for yourself. You have to be out there, and table stakes is you got to work hard and be smart. And you're all going to do that, right? But the next thing is, it's not going to come to you if you just stay in your office and you work hard and like, oh, people are just going to give you opportunity. No. You got to get out and you got to say, well, I have just done this and I want to do more, and I want to do more of this. And I think I can contribute to this. So get me more of this, and I'll show you, right? And then show them, right? And then that's how you start to build your reputation and about any type of law you want to go into. So be your own advocate. I know it's cliche to say it, but man, it's so true.
See, we have about protecting the peace, how to be your own advocate in addition to advocating for your clients. I love it.
Now, IP for Indigenous people, I want to take that course, because I remember I got a sixth grader, okay, and I was talking to a parent teacher, and we're talking about social studies, and we're talking about the Dark Ages, and I was like, you know, the Dark Ages was dark for you, right? The rest of the world was doing all kinds of stuff during the Dark Ages, right? And then you guys talk about the Renaissance and you're like, oh shit, we got all these ideas. I was like, no, that's what everybody else was doing. And then you got those ideas, right? From trade. Like, where does algebra come from? Like algebra, that's like Middle Eastern. Where does algorithm come from, right? That's what we were doing in the Dark Ages. So teach some of that stuff. But anyway, I'm just joking.
Right. If we go into the issues with history, we will. Be
I'll stop there.
I know, right? No, I agree, 100%.
Like, we've touched on so many different topics, and honestly, like, I wish you could continue having this conversation because we touched on history, the institution, like just so many different experiences. I'm sad that we have a limited amount of time. This is going to be my last question before I hand it over to the audience, and I'm so excited that the audience is so invigorated, that everybody's loving the panel. Okay, come to IP. You see, come to IP.
We're interested.
I promise it's fun.
Yeah. No, we're really cool people, right? And I will say it. I will say it. We are damn cool people.
I have to echo that. So my last question is going to be kind of same question, but kind of split. So for Tiffany and Camilla, how do you navigate being your authentic self, often in an overwhelming space of whiteness in both the legal and technical realm? And with that, have you experienced misogynoir and how have you dealt with that? And then to Tony, same question. How do you navigate being your authentic self, often in an overwhelming space of whiteness, both in legal and technical realm? But have you received experiences of xenophobia or experience of discomfort despite the progress you all have made in your career? If you want to let that ruminate for a second, it's okay.
I mean, I guess I can go first on this one. I like to just show up as my authentic self every single day. I will say it was very interesting when I went through the interviewing process. So it was not that long ago, a few years ago. There wasn't a single person of color that I guess there was one person of color that I talked to at Latham. And I was like, unsure. I was like, is this the right place for me? I liked everybody and everything, but I also went in braids. And I think, some of us on here probably know what that means. Like, I came in braids, I didn't wear my hair naturally. I was like, what do I do? So on my first day of work, when I started as a fall associate, I wore braids the whole summer. I was like, am I just going to show up with my natural hair? Am I just going to, and I just did it. And of course, nobody's going to say anything to me, but I was so concerned about showing up in a space where there aren't that many of us in DC. And almost everybody else is on the corporate side. And so I think Camilla's nodding because I think she's the only other associate litigator that I knew, IP litigator that I actually knew coming as a fall associate. So it's been the two of us now, I think 3 or 4 of us now, but I was a little concerned about it, oh my God, I'm gonna stick out. But I just was like, I'm not gonna change my hair or how I look or how I approach, the job, because if they don't like me, then this isn't the place for me to be anyway, right? So if that means that I'm gonna miss out on opportunities because I chose to wear my hair in a natural state, or I wore it in a puff, it's in a bun today, but normally sometimes it's in a puff or whatever. If people don't wanna accept that about me and prevent me from growing my career because of how I showed up, then this isn't the place for me. And so that's kind of how I approach coming into work every day, hopping on a Zoom, whatever it might be. I'm just gonna have to be myself. And if they don't like it, then I guess we'll part ways at some point. But that's kind of how I look at it. I don't know about you, Camilla.
I mean, it's a little different from me. I was old, right? I was old when I was in law school. I still I feel affiliation to millennials, but I'm not actually a millennial. And so I came into big law having worked several places before and confident that I could get another job. And I think I see a lot of young associates who lack that confidence. And they're like, if I don't have this job, then I will never get a job and I will never, they're terrified of being fired. And you just can't operate from a place of terror, right? And so it had been decades for me of being the only, right? I'm a biologist, right? A molecular cellular biologist. There were no other Black people, right? There were no other Black people when I was, or maybe one other when I was in graduate school at Harvard. obviously we had a community at MIT, but in the biology department, there was very few. I have almost always been the only in the space. And so, but the advice I can give, so I came to it with a different confidence, right? That I knew, I had family backing me up, and I knew I had skills that I could take elsewhere. So I didn't mind being myself. I don't mind speaking out. But again, it comes back to the people I work with. I found people who I was comfortable with and who were okay with me having a voice and who were willing to listen. And so that gave me the confidence that, like, oh, if this goes wrong with this person, I can fall back on this person and be like, this is what happened, and that sort of thing. And being on various committees, someone gave, not knowing it, someone gave me the greatest compliment ever. I was on some panel for San Diego, and they were just like, and Camila is always going to tell it like it is. And I'm like, that's that's an amazing compliment, but it speaks to my comfort to speaking truth, and being known for speaking truth even to power. At least within these committees, like, within certain within certain parameters. But it is because someone has made me comfortable here, and I know someone has my back here and will help protect me if things go sideways. So I implore you to sort of find that, really make the effort to find that when you first start.
I'll just pick up on that. Thank you. And I'll actually go, I'll say, I love that. And I agree 100%. Let me now talk about what it's like wherever you are to practice out in the world, right? And my experience with other is, so I hold myself out, and this is what I always wanted to be, was lead trial counsel, right? So jury trials, federal case, big cases, I'm the guy, right? That's what I wanted to be. That people are like, why'd you go to law school? I was watching Law and Order and I saw Jack McCoy give a closing argument, and I was like, that's shit I want to do, right? And I was like, all right, cool. So that's why I went to law school, right? And that's just as good as reason as any, right? Maybe not, I don't want to change the world, but I enjoy it, and that's what I want to do, right? So now the niche trial attorney, lead counsel, I mean, you want to talk who that is? That is 55 to 65-year-old, 6'2", white man with gray hair, right? That is who is your lead trial counsel, right? So anytime I'm trying a case, people, I've had my own partners, like at other, and I came from Skadden, for where I was there for 20 years and ran the whole IP group, but I had a huge case. And I remember like being somewhere at lunch and someone was like, oh, it's a huge case. So who's going to try that case? I was like, I'm going to flip and try that case, right? Like this guy, right? So my story is, and I'll keep it brief. It was a case in East Texas, right? Federal court, JP Morgan Chase, $900 million patent case. Only non-white guy there is me. I'm lead counsel. We've been in front of this jury for 2.5 weeks. And the other side is the plaintiffs are giving closing arguments. And here's what he says. His name is Nelson Roach. If you ever come across him, you can tell him I hate his guts. Right? But that's fine. We're over it now. But Nelson Roach, he's giving closing arguments, and he says, it's somewhere like at the 30-minute mark, he goes, remember, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if we don't protect intellectual property rights in this country, we'll wind up like countries like India or Egypt, where they don't invent things. They sit around hating America and thinking of ways to fly planes into buildings, right? Now, I told this story in front of a panel of federal judges, and one of the judges was like, you're a litigator, you embellish stuff. Is this true? And I showed her the transcript. I said, you can read it. This is a transcript, right? And what do you do, right? So you get your client in the back who's like, your first thought is like, oh shit, my client's like, why is Tony Sammy doing this? Because we're gonna get screwed because that's the lawyer that I chose. So you got that going on in your head, right? Then you're looking at the jury, you're like, did they hear this? Were they paying attention? And then if someone brings up 9/11 and I object, which you never do during a closing, are they gonna just be like, well, someone's talking about terrorism and this brown guy is getting upset about it? So long story short, right? I picked my jaw up off the floor. I mean, it was already like 3 minutes after he said it. And I didn't even realize, I was like, what am I going to do? Right. Didn't object, whatever. The jury goes, leaves. And I asked the judge, I got to get back on the record. Right. And he's like, what do you want to say? I said, I want to say it outside the presence of the jury. This is for appeals. This is for the federal circuit, right? I said, my name is Tony Sammy, and I've got to put this in front of the on the record, because when the federal appellate court reads the record, they don't see, they just read. I said, I am Indian. I am brown, right? And he's like, okay, you got it on the record, because you got to protect yourself. We won that case, and that's great. And I'm not saying this is going to happen to you, and I'm sure many people have dealt with much worse, right? But it exists, and it's not in your little sort of liberal law firm. It's like where you're going to be trying cases and where you're going to be practicing law. In Marshall, Texas, yeah, it's not New York, right? Either is, Delaware is very different from San Francisco, is very different from Chicago. So all I'm saying, my only advice is that, and I told Simone this before we started this panel, and I'm sorry for taking long, but it's really, really important. And that is, it's easy for a guy like me who's 49 years old and going to be 50. And I'm like, to tell you, you got to be authentic, right? Because it's hard to be authentic when you don't have power. When you're like the first year associate or you're applying, it's some guy like me comes around and it's like, yeah, you be your authentic self. Well, that's really hard to do, right? So only when you get older, you realize that every choice you make in how you dress, what you wear, how you act, right? You leave a little bit of your authenticity at home, right? So you can fit in at work. Right. And so hopefully as you go along, the world is changing for the better, that you can have more of that authenticity when you go to work and not do what I did and give too much of it away early on in your career. So that's my best advice. Sorry if I didn't really answer the question, but thought it was important.
No, I think you answered it amazingly. And unfortunately, we have to wrap this panel because we have our judicial clerkship panel with amazing federal judges happening right now. But our panelists have graciously agreed, at least I can say, Tiffany has graciously agreed to answer some of the questions put in the chat. And I'm hoping that Paramjeet and Camila, you also will be willing to answer these questions and potentially share your contact so that everyone here can have a new colleague and maybe a mentor, a friend, and just, we can pull in the next generation of IP attorneys. So I would like to thank all of my phenomenal panelists for your insights, your time, your wisdom. To all of my amazing attendees, thank you for your engagement, your questions. I think this was such a phenomenal panel. Listen, I'm ready to go practice IP today. I didn't even take the bar yet. So thank you all so much. Please join our judicial clerkship panel, and I will see you all in like a minute.
Thank you
all.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.